Whoa, I'm normally not that big on these episodes. Let's see if we can dial in focus. Okay, welcome to another Tech at Scale, Coffee and Dev. And today I have not had my coffee yet, so it's going to be, you can actually even see a little bit shower. I'm way behind schedule. I didn't have time to even really prep, so we're not going to get slides, but we're going to talk about today's topic, which is system design. Before I even get right into this, I highly recommend this book. If we're doing anything related to system design and you're doing interviews or you want to know where to begin with system design, this is currently the best book on it, like hands down. Unless someone can point me to something else, this is the best book I can recommend. And it covers everything from designing CDNs, web crawlers, dealing with load balancers, how load balancers work, thinking about consistent hashing, URL shortener. It just covers a lot. Even if you can't afford the book, I highly recommend going on Amazon and just going through the index and looking at the chapters, because that will give you an insight on what you should be looking at. So today's topic about system design is really just getting you into the mindset of understanding that it's not all coding. Everything you do is not all coding, okay? It's not always just about the code. If you want to find a way to really accelerate your career, I highly recommend finding a way to start architecting from a design perspective of what your application is going to look like and how it plays in the larger ecosystem of the product offering that your company does. And then also looking at the infrastructure side of things, because more and more how your application gets deployed and how that's supposed to be managed becomes more critical. I see a lot of companies where development lives in their own development world, and then things get essentially thrown over the wall. Like, yeah, sure, you have CI/CD, and it deploys out to, let's say, your Kubernetes cluster. But if that dev hasn't written the spec of how that should deploy, or hasn't actually outlined what their expectations are in terms of deployment, you could have something that is, let's say, super high traffic, front-facing, running on the same boxes that are doing, like, say, your batch analytics stuff. And you could totally run these boxes out of memory. What happens if your devs haven't set appropriate quotas? What happens if you run out of memory on it? What happens if you peg the CPU on these nodes? You haven't defined any sort of separation of concern. And, you're basically just throwing things over the wall. And I want to challenge you to rethink this. I want you on your next project to build a diagram, okay? So let me just get that. Don't even have it ready, guys. That's how unprepared we are today. But let me just get the share screen. Great. So this is Draw.io. Okay. You can come in here. You can go create new diagram. I think I usually use either the Amazon one or something in the networking one. Whichever works. Like, sure. Try and pick one that doesn't look so bad. or is it, no, engineering is like other engineering. Sure, like this. Whatever. Great. Your next time you're working on an application, design out the different components, especially if you're a service that's surrounded by other services calling you. There is building out like a UML diagram of like how a request goes in and how a request comes back and all that. But having something that gives you that like 9,000 foot kind of view of how like a client sends in a request to your application calls into a load balancer, calls into a web server, that web server calls into, like, say, a database. The database is going to call or your web server calls into cache. If it's not in cache, it calls into database. Understanding this is a good spot. Then understanding how those individual things get deployed in your orchestration and how they interwork between each other on either the network level or the separation of where they run on different nodes is like the next step after that. Because The more you know on this, the better you become prepared, and the more you can investigate when issues come in. You can jump in, say, hey, I think the issue is related to blah, blah. You also prepare whoever is your SRE or your DevOps or your operations department that you are basically coming with a contract and requirements to them. Like we as dev, we love when product comes with very clear technical requirements. It must do X, or feature requirements that were translated into technical requirements. Like it must be able to serve images out to the user. We expect 1,000 users. It must have a latency time of blah or responsive time of blah. We like that because that's very concrete, and we can basically get checkbox of we met those requirements. Great, you're happy. That was our contract. There's no argument of like, oh, you didn't implement blah. Well, it wasn't part of the requirements, right? That's the famous words of it's out of scope. Now, when you pass this off to like either the DevOps person on your team or the department or whoever it may be, because a lot of places you're not usually writing this yourself. Kudos if you are. They don't have such strict requirements. And you could say, well, that's on them. Their department should set those requirements. Or we can go one step back and we can just say, you know what? I'm going to put that on myself. I'm going to solve it. I'm going to list out the requirements of like, this should be isolated. Here's why. Here's what I'm expecting for the resource quotas to be. Like, here's the request. Here's the limit on the resources. Do I do anything that's going to require some sort of like security group stuff to be changed? What volumes do I need? What size of volumes do I expect? Do I expect there to be a sidecar that reads all the logs out to our central logging database? Or am I handling something? Or all this other stuff? Everything I just said. Next time you go do your application, just make that checklist, fill it out of the things that you expect from the operation side. And that's a great place to start. For the more intro of how to do the architecture and how to understand how to design these things, I highly recommend this book. And you know what? That is the short and sweet Coffee and Dev. No coffee today video, but I will see you on Friday. And I hope this little quick video really brought you help today and levels you up for another week of kicking some dev ass. Till next time, I'm out to get my coffee. Ciao.